morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're tuning in from. I am happy today to be able to sit down with executives in the copper space to discuss the industry, a couple of hot topics, and ultimately explore the companies they're representing. So good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, good afternoon.
Before I get into some housekeeping, I'd love if we just do a quick round of introductions. So if you could just share who you are, what company you're representing, and your role there, and we'll start with you, Brian.
So thanks very much, Romeo, for putting this on. My name is Brian Voss. I'm the CEO of Capitalite. We have a copper nickel exploration in Quebec. We're very excited about it.
Awesome. Throw it to Jamie next.
Thank you, Romeo 6, for the invite. I am Jamie Levy, President and CEO of Generation Mining. We are developing the Marathon Copper Palladium project in Northern Ontario.
Thanks. And Terry-Ann?
I'm Terry-Ann Wilkie, VP of Communications for Barksdale Resources. We have assets in the Patagonia District of Arizona, adjacent to South 32's Taylor.
And finally, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Romeo. Nice to be here. I'm Jeff Ackert, President and CEO of Cascade Copper. We're an exploration company focused on copper in Canada with an extra focus on British Columbia and a project in Ontario.
Awesome. Thank you. Now, just before we get into the protein of today's discussion, I do have a bit of housekeeping, so bear with me. I'll say today's event is being recorded and will likely be available this afternoon. It'll show up right in your inbox. And it's also an interactive event. If you have any questions for the speakers, there's a chat box on the bottom right of the screen. Please feel free to ask questions at any time. If they're really on topic, we'll try to get to them throughout the conversation. Otherwise, we'll try and tackle some at the end. If there are questions that are just really specific to an individual security and we don't have time to get to them today, I'll make sure the appropriate team gets them and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. But enough out of me. Let's get into the meat of today's discussion. So I wanted to start with a macro question. They say copper's got a PhD in economics because of its ability to sort of predict general economic flows. So I'm curious for everyone on the panel's perspective on what the downturn in copper price from May tells us about the global economy more broadly, and then what's the next move from here? Brian, I can start with you there.
Yeah, thanks. I've actually got 3 points. I'll try to make them as quick as I can to leave time for everyone else. But from May until now, it's not a really big deal. For example, the kinds of things I look for are a 5-year chart, a 10-year chart. And in copper, it's showing my favorite situation, which is it's bullish because it's making continually higher highs and continually higher lows. So it's just moving up. And what we've seen since May, sure, it's down a little bit, but it only brings us back to where we were in March of this year, and then again where we were throughout all of 2021. So to me, the down move since May hasn't demonstrated itself as meaningful yet. The second thing I'd say about prices, and I'm sure everyone here would agree, there's really two prices that a developer or an explorer cares about. One is the spot price, sure, but if we're really going to have all the supply come online that we're going to need, what is what I call the inducement price? What's the price that's going to make investors be willing to back these projects for CapEx? And I don't think that's anywhere near $4. I think it's way higher than here. So I'm certainly not worried about a little downtick today or this quarter. And then finally, there's with the Inflation Reduction Act and everything going on in the EU and China and the Department of Defense in the US funding projects, you're really going to break up the global price into hemisphere prices. So, if it's $4.15 on the copper future now, is that the China price? Is it the price that the GM's going to pay to somebody who's making material in Ontario? Those are different answers. So I'm not terribly worried about it at all.
I appreciate that, Brian. Jamie, I'll get you in there on this. What do you think price copper today says about the economy, and where do you think it's going?
To go to Brian's point, I'm not looking at short-term fluctuations. Our mining plan, we're 13, 15 years, 5 years down the road, whatever it might be, we know it's going higher. We did a webinar with this individual named Adam Simon. He was put a report out, I think it was International Energy Forum, I forget the name of the other professor. He's at University of Michigan, and basically just to hit baseline copper demand without the hybrid vehicles, without the copper, without the net zero, just the baseline, we need one new mine a year. And one new mine a year is one tier one mine. And we're talking about 500,000 tons of copper. And there's none of those in the pipeline. There's only been, I think, 3 projects that came on production over the past couple of years, and those aren't tier one projects. So where's the copper coming from? So just simple supply demand. Even at the baseline, there's not enough copper out there by 2050. If we want to get to this net zero, which I don't believe can happen by 2050, we're going to need 6 tier one mines per year built. We all know the timeline between permitting or exploration to actual development. So it's just not going to happen. So the price of copper will have to go up. I think Brian used the word inducement. I look at incentive pricing, and it could be upwards of the low $5 a pound needed to get some of these mines up and going. And there's just none in the pipeline.
No, appreciate that. Jeff, I'll get you in there to talk about the macro and copper.
Yeah, I mean, as an explorer, you don't really care about what the spot price is at any particular time. But, I think the fluctuations we've seen in the last 6 months or so are, they're geopolitical, they're sort of daily news, weekly news. And it's just a knee-jerk reaction, I think, in the market that drives some of these price fluctuations. But, echoing what Brian and Jamie said, the macro is that the demand is there. I just came back from an Africa trip, and you wouldn't believe the amount of housing that's being built there, affordable housing, not just here in Canada, but lots of places around the world. So that kind of demand worldwide is just going to drive the demand for copper. And as Jamie says, there's nothing there to replace it in the short term. So I think we're all in good position where we are in the copper market.
Appreciate that. And Terry Ann, I'll throw it to you to wrap this question up.
You bet. To Jeff's point, we're exploration as well, and our neighbor is clearly building a mine. But and to Jamie's point, the rate of urbanization in first world is growing, and when we're building here, we're building, all these places need infrastructure and appliances and whatnot, and then the rate of urbanization in emerging markets is growing rapidly. To Jeff's point, in Africa or India, where's all this supply coming from? Where Chile and Peru are coming in with less production as of recently. So we need to see more come online and rapidly if we want to meet the demands. So I'm not concerned with the price.
No. Appreciate that. And Taryn, I'll stick with you for the next question. I encourage all of you to take this in whatever direction you'd like. If you want to take it in geology and permitting and funding, et cetera. But relative to the exploration of other metals, what are some unique challenges of copper exploration and development that you notice in the industry?
Well, I think it's just the sheer scale. Copper projects are generally quite large. They take, on the exploration side, it takes years and sometimes decades of drilling, and an incredible amount of dollars have to go into these things to figure out, what they look like, are they economical, and then to bring them online. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of money, and I think that's where you're going to see a massive bottleneck moving forward.
Appreciate that, Jamie. I'll throw it to you. What's different about copper compared to gold exploration or others?
I'm going to take it, kind of pivot the question, be a little politician here. I think the interest in copper has only recently arisen from the investor community. Those in the mining business, we're all not. We do other metals as well, or we've been with other metals, and the major investors, or the majority of the investors, are in gold and probably other precious metals like silver. So copper is only starting to get to be the flavor of the day. So a lot of these mining funds, whether it's the GDXJ or whatever you want to call it, some of the bigger indexes, they're investing in gold and silver projects, and they haven't quite come into copper. So I'd say the investor demand isn't quite at the same level as the precious metals like gold and silver, and I think that will change soon. Obviously, because we know the demand and the need for copper, but I think right now the investor demand still isn't there. There's been a few successful copper projects that have come online, but still there's a lot of gold and silver companies right now and very few copper companies. So I think it's going to change a little bit.
No, appreciate that. Brian, again, take this wherever you'd like. You feel free to be as pivoty as Jamie. But what do you think is different about copper versus other metals, exploration, permitting, et cetera?
Yeah, the pivot I'm going to take here is the friendshoring concept that's happening in the West. As I mentioned before, the Inflation Reduction Act and all the other things that are starting to happen in capitals, Ottawa, Washington, Brussels, where people in power are realizing that if you're going to compete with China, you might as well do it fairly. And right now they've taken so much of the means of smelting and refining and raw material production out of the ore and moved it offshore to China. So that means you're shipping material from wherever in the world over the ocean to China. They're going to process it once, twice, 3 times, turn it into something and send it back out. And as trade theory, that's great. But if it begins to impede the industrial base and have a permanent problem on the economies of the West, as we've now seen, governments are starting to react to that. So here's what's different about copper. Governments can put enough friendshoring rules in place to have a success with copper, but you're probably not going to have a success with lithium. Graphite, for example, 93% of all graphite is either mined or processed in China. But copper, the number I think is about 55. So you can get that down to 35 and declare success. So when the rules are going to be updated for friendshoring, copper is going to be the big winner. Gold isn't seen as an electric vehicle metal. Silver, maybe. The others are too small to make a difference. And copper is obvious in the mind of the general public. Everyone knows what it is. Everyone knows it's related to electricity. So that's going to have the best supports.
I appreciate that. And Jeff, I'll throw it to you for any pivot you want to take on what makes copper a different kind of game.
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to bring it back down to sort of the on-the-ground geology discovery. You know, a lot of the best copper mines in the world, the high-grade copper mines have been found, you know, whether it's the Congo or down the Cordilleran in South America. So our challenge, I think, in the copper space is to be looking in non-traditional places or, you know, inaccessible places. And when I mean inaccessible, it's sort of, you know, below surface stuff that's maybe buried. It's not visible on the ground. So the challenge is really, you know, using as much technology, using as much historic data, thinking a little bit out of the box and trying to figure out, you know, where could copper be found that it hasn't been found before. And we've got the benefit now that we can go a little lower in our average grades just because the copper price is higher. There's, you know, innovations in mining that allows us to do large tonnage block caving, for instance, at depth. You know, you see companies like Newcrest out of Australia going down and, you know, going into SolGold's project and saying, okay, we can mine, you know, a kilometer below the surface, you know. So those are the things that are a bit of a challenge. But I think, you know, our philosophy at Cascade is to look maybe a little bit out of the box, look in non-traditional areas and use a lot of science. And I think we can be successful that way.
I appreciate that. The next question, I'm going to kind of divide between Jamie and everybody else, if you guys don't mind. So, Jamie, I know GenM is, you know, it's the most advanced story on the call today. I'm curious how GenM is approaching sustainability in copper mining, and what are you planning to implement to minimize environmental impact while maintaining operational efficiency?
I must have missed that question. So you're asking what kind of technologies we could use?
Yeah, that would work.
So, you know, there is certain technologies we're looking at. I mean, as of right now, we're looking at traditional technologies, you know, with some kind of minor tweaking going ahead. We looked at, say, for our open pit, we're looking at trolley assist, but you need to have the ramps in before you have those trolleys built. We're looking at battery electric haul trucks, but the Cat 993s aren't fully developed yet, so we'd be using the diesel engine to start, and then we would look to replace them once they become call it more efficient or more productive. I mean, the last thing you want to do is build a mine and have stuff not working. So unfortunately, the technology is happening. It's not happening probably in our timing if we're getting the start in the next couple of years. But if things do develop faster, we would certainly look to pivot as fast as we can. We know a lot of the underground miners could use electric equipment. Our equipment, whether it's the shovels, could be electric, but the big haul trucks still need to be diesel or hybrid right now.
I appreciate that. And looking to the explorers on the call, what are you guys doing early in stage to make sure you're set up for sustainability in the future? Terry-Ann, I can start with you there.
Thank you. We have the luxury of being beside a world-class company called South 32 that's really doing essentially all of the heavy lifting. They're a world-class company doing world-class things all around the world. They know this business exceptionally well. They're doing an incredible job in the district at advancing the project in a sustainable way, working with the communities intimately and getting things across the line. For us, we're really lucky to be able to piggyback off of their tremendous efforts in the community, and I'm sure they're using every bullet they have in their arsenal to make sure that they are doing things properly and sustainably, and making sure that community rallies behind them, and they're really doing a great job.
I appreciate that. Jeff, I'll throw it to you for the same question. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, sustainability at the exploration stage is, is something you need to think about right off the bat. Is how you're doing your exploration, how you're treating the environment, your cooperation with local governments and that kind of thing. So, we're taking the steps at this point to just. I think at this point it's more of a communications level, making sure that everybody understands what you're up to, what you're doing, and working with the communities to make sure that the impact that you're making at this point is extremely low. Sustainability for us is more like trying to keep the project going and sustain the project through success and funding. So, that's where we're at really at this point.
No, appreciate that. Brian, I'll throw it to you before closing this one off.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Jeff's point is a good one, that whenever we're going out to the field, well in advance, we get in touch with the local communities and say, we're going to be there. Here's what we're going to be doing. And you're welcome to join us. Come on out. We'll give you a tour. Or if you've got, and this happens a lot in Shefferville, if you've got vendors that you co-own or part own as a community, we'll use those. But there's one other thing and this is it's a technology answer to your question. A lot of exploration is done by helicopter because you're in remote places and you can't really move around, especially in the summertime when the lakes are not frozen over. And so we do that in the summertime, but in the winter, we're working on a technology that's been brought to us by a company called Arctic Trucks. And they make, in our case, what we'd be interested in, Ford 350s. So that's the Super Duty dually. But they retrofit the whole thing to be designed to go over ice with heavy loads. So they make their tires inflatable and deflatable from inside the truck. Okay, so now once you get to that point, you can carry heavy loads across the ice. And that gets us to the point where, let's say we get to drilling in the winter time, which is an expectation. We can do it without helicopter. We can take the drill apart into 5 pieces, drag it out across the ice from the Ford. And when we're going over ice, we lower the pressure in the tires so that we can carry more weight over the same footprint. And we think that's going to be a huge advantage for us in terms of emissions, because helicopters are a mess for emissions. And we think it's going to make a big savings for us too. So there's 2 ideas.
No, appreciate that. There's a couple political questions in the chat, so I'm going to try to get you guys canceled really quickly.
Looks like Jamie's.
Hey, Hey, Romeo, can you just ask that question again? Because I think I just wanted to add one thing onto my answer. Sorry, I think sound kind of went out in your question. Can you go ahead?
No problem at all. Just noted that because GenM is kind of the most advanced story on the call today, curious how you guys are approaching sustainability in mining and what's going to be implemented to minimize enviro impact while keeping the operational efficiency you've talked about.
Okay, so if I could just answer that question, because I really didn't answer that question before. So if you don't mind me going back.
Please, go for it.
You know, we do have a sustainability team, you know, led by Ruben Wallin and my CEO, Drew Anwell. And, you know, they've worked at larger companies like Detour and Barracks and Plasters back in the day, Victor. So they've worked at developing projects. You know, they've had this kind of culture of, you know, doing it right. And by doing it right, we have a few other acronyms like GSD and, you know, certain stuff like that. But the culture of doing it right. And again, it's not just for copper companies, it's all mining companies. I think we all are under the same umbrella there. So I know you asked a question about copper companies, but all mining companies are united in their sort of sustainability of the environment. You know, we want to make sure that, as Brian had suggested, the local communities, or maybe it was Jeff, that we have the agreements, that the consent from the First Nations, you know, with respect to environment, obviously, you know, as far along as we did get our environmental assessment and getting the permit. So there's lots of eyeballs on this to make sure that what the First Nations are requesting, and we work with them and the government to make sure that if their demand is that the water quality remains at the same level, we will work with them on that. So to have these positive relationships, not just with the First Nations, but also with the government, the local communities. We go to the town all the time at the town of Marathon. Big supporters, the job creation, the financial money they'll get back from these communities, the job opportunities, and the taxation. It's great for the North. So it's all working everybody together. But the most important thing is not just the you know, the S, it's also the E and the G in there as well. And we work with all these groups together to make sure that it's done. I mean, just as a quick aside, the first time I went to a site visit up in Marathon when we were looking to purchase from Sibanye, it was all about health and safety. And, you know, getting in and out of the helicopter, to use a Brian analogy, or to make sure you wear the steel toe shoes, like, these people are professionals in what they do. And, you know, fatalities should never happen in mining. I know it happens once in a while, but health and safety is the first culture principle that I find is so important in mining. And as everybody works together on that, everyone has each other's back, then the ESG part comes around too. So I think they're all intertwined, and I think it's very important to have that team that's professional and that will make sure that everybody's protected from the individuals on site, from, as Brian said, the consultants or the investors that come for site visits, but obviously for the employees and all the First Nations, and then protecting the environment, which is, to me, the most important thing. Sorry for babbling there.
No, appreciate it. And actually, that's a good springboard. I'd love if everybody could talk really right now, actually, about how the companies they're representing engage with the local communities and stakeholders. How do you operate in that regard? What strategies are in place to ensure you've got a positive impact? Jeff, I'll throw it to you first.
Sure. Thanks, Romeo. Yeah, I mean, we feel that before you even swing a hammer on the ground, you've got to get in and you've got to talk to the local governments, and that includes First Nations governments as well. So our philosophy is really, before any permitting is done, even before you go and start, you know, trenching or sampling or geophysics, you go in and you see who the local players are, and we've done that, and we've done it with success at our Rogers Creek and Fire Mountain. We actually hired a First Nations consultant. He put us in touch and got us the right language, really, and that's part of the education as an explorer, to go into different areas to understand the language that people speak when they talk. I mean, not other than English, but it's sort of, what do they want to hear? What are they expecting? That kind of thing. So we were successful in that regards. You know, we sat down with the chiefs in 2 different areas up near Pemberton. We called up, we have another project near Princeton, and called them up and said, look, I'd like to come in and say hello and just introduce myself. So I drove out there and met them in their office, and had a great chat and understood them, what they really wanted to do and how they wanted to mitigate environmental issues and cultural issues and that kind of thing. And so it was a good meeting. And at the end of the meeting, they said, you know what, after all the companies we've talked to, you're the only one that came in to see us, in the front door kind of thing. So I think that's really important for us is to make those relationships right off, manage expectations right from the start, and then you can go forward with your exploration with confidence that everybody's on board. So that's what we do.
No, appreciate that. Terry, I'll throw it to you for engaging local communities.
For sure. Again, we have the luxury of being beside South 32, and their footprint is going to be obviously larger than ours, considering we're exploration. Our footprint is quite tiny. But we started off by really educating the community on what exactly we're doing, what will be impacted. We put a lot of visuals together for them that kind of map out the mining cycle from exploration all the way to development and production. Answered, all of the questions they've had. We had open houses. We have an open door policy at our office in Patagonia, Arizona. So the locals can come and we can address any concerns that they may have, but the community has been really quite cooperative but I think transparency and leveraging, there's companies or groups out there, Better in Our Backyard is putting out an incredible amount of content that really educate, all stakeholders and communities around the world on how mining has changed and has evolved throughout the years. And I think if for those listening, check out Better in Our Backyard, because, in North America, we have some of the most stringent laws and regulations around, mining and exploration. At the end of the day, permitting is basically, regulates what we can and cannot do throughout that process. And it's really the foundation of, protecting the environment. And we just abide by those rules. Otherwise you're not going to get your permit. So, but yeah, check out Better in Your Backyard.
Appreciate that. We will actually get back to permitting right after from a chat question, but I'll throw it to Brian, you first on your projects in Quebec, how you engage with local stakeholders.
Sure. I'll begin by saying that we think Quebec is a fantastic jurisdiction. There's a lot of mining that happens in Quebec. There's a lot of exploration. There's a lot of new mines getting built over the last several years and the next few years. And then within Quebec, we think we're lucky enough to be in the most pro-mining town, which is the nearest town site to us is Schefferville. And Schefferville was built out of nothing in the 1950s by the Iron Ore Company of Canada. And there are still open pit iron ore mines operating in the region. They've got the infrastructure is great. There's a railhead. There are hotels, there's an airport. And when we talk to people there, either just people you meet in the restaurant or even the mining liaison officer, the community message so far has been, we're certainly not against mining. That's why we're here. That's why the town is here. But as a community, what happened in the 1950s was the mines got built, and if you weren't working at the mine, you didn't benefit. So what we don't want is to be left behind, but we definitely want mines to be here because those are our jobs. So what are we doing? Like I said earlier, we're talking with them in advance every time. We talk with them every time we're there. We invite them to come and see what we're doing. And when you get to the eventual question of positive social and economic impact, which I think was one of the key phrases of your question, that's a definition that'll get worked out between the First Nation communities, the town, the province, and ourselves. We'll figure out what that is as a group, and we'll deliver that. Because as Terry Ann said, if you can't deliver for everyone, you're not going to be able to deliver at all.
It's a good point. I do want to get into permitting. There was a great question from the chat that wanted to compare and contrast the Canadian and American permitting landscape. But of course, this is really a tale of more like 4 jurisdictions than 2. So eager to have you guys all give a perspective on what permitting is like in your specific jurisdiction and how it might compare to others. Terry Ann, I'll throw it to you first.
Yes. So we're based in Arizona in the U.S. and more specifically in the forest. So we not only have to permit, we basically have to permit through the feds and through the Forest Service. It can be very grueling. The regulatory bodies are very rigorous. It took a long time to get through that permitting process. But the permitting process is in place, again, to protect the environment, to make sure that we're doing things in a sustainable way, in a safe way. There's studies all from, air quality and bugs and bunnies and water and noise. It's very rigorous, very different from, let's say, permitting through, BLM is a little bit faster. And when you're on private ground, like our neighbor, they have the luxury of just permitting through the state. So it's much, much quicker for them. They also have federal support. They've qualified for the Fast 41. So they're in very good shape next door. And we did get our permit, but it did take quite a lengthy time because we are permitting through the feds and through the Forest Service.
That's one of the unique distinctions. Sometimes even in the States, you gotta go through the feds. Jamie, I'll throw it to you for your experience with Ontario permitting.
It's painful, a fair word. It was quite the experience. I mean, we did, in November of 2022, we did get our environmental assessment approved, our EIS. So that was a huge milestone for us. This process actually began in 2014, not by us, but by a previous operator. The fellow that we actually engaged, one of the lawyers to help us out, by the end of it, we stacked up all of the paper, which, we like to support the pulp and paper industry. Anyways, we put all the papers together, and the binders were as tall as this fellow was. He wasn't the tallest of people, but it was still, almost 6 feet tall. But needless to say is there's lots of work that needed to get done to get that EA complete. The consent of the First Nations is certainly needed for an EA. But then even after you get your EA, there's still a lot of permits that are needed. And we've got our earlier works permits, our closure plans, our species of risk permit, our permit to remove trees. Now we're working on the water. We got our air permits. We did receive all of our federal permits, which is the DFO fisheries offset, which is a huge milestone for us. And we did received our Schedule 2 from the feds as well. So we got 3 more provincial permits, which we anticipate hopefully to get by fall time, early winter, by the end of this year. But it's the other P word is patience, and I don't have much patience, but you do need patience, and you do need to get the good professionals. Like my staff has been beyond professional, and the people that they bring on, as Terry mentioned, air, water, all these baseline testings. We had caribou experts. There's no caribou in our area, but the federal government had mandated us that we have to protect the caribou if and when they do come back, the bats and everything else. So we need the WSPs, the Stantec, all of these large corporations, the Northern Bioscience. I give all these shout outs, all these expenses I pay every month, but they're needed because they're the ones that go deal with the peer group at the government. And the government is big, and I know the Ford government is trying to streamline it, but there's just a lot of people in the government. So it's patience trying to figure out who's the right person to talk to and how we can work together to protect the environment, because we're all on the same page. It's just how do we get there so they can, as Terry mentioned earlier, how does it get regulated through the permits? So we got to sit down with them and work towards that regulation, how we could all be on the same side. Sorry. But needless to say is it's painful, but when you can see the end zone and we're ready to cross it, it's going to be a huge celebration once we get it all done. But it's not only permits, there's also conditions that we have to do as well. So there's lots of work that needs to get done, but we're going to get it done.
You can see the champagne at least at this point. It's visible.
Is it? It's only baby duck right now, Romeo. I can't
There you go. We're still on Prosecco.
Yeah.
Jeff, I'll throw it to you for BC.
Sure. Yeah. Permitting it's a necessity, obviously, and I think what's happened is for us anyway. It's taken quite a while, but I think it's probably a product of the success of the discoveries and the new deposits in BC. I think the government was basically overwhelmed with new applications for permits. at exploration stage and development stage. So when we put in our application for a drilling permit, an exploration permit, it was almost a year ago. And we're just on the cusp of actually getting it now. We basically got all the approvals done, all the modules, all the caribous and spotted owls and, goats, mountain goats and all that kind of stuff. It's all ticked the boxes. Now it's just a matter of putting in our remediation bond, which is a reasonable amount at about $20,000. And which is kind of interesting. In the past, you would hand that money over to the government. In this case, now what they do is they have a safekeeping agreement with your bank or your financial institution. So you put the money aside, sort of in a GIC. You sign an agreement that's shared with the government in case it's needed. Then it goes for remediation. So it's pretty well laid out, what the steps are. But in our case, it seemed to be, we're almost there, and then something else popped out. So it was kind of a shoot from the hip kind of thing for most of the way. But I'm happy to say that it's probably a week away now from us having it in our hands. So that's good.
That's great.
Congrats.
That's
Thanks.
great. Good for you, Jeff.
Brian, I'll throw it to you to wrap up permitting. I know you briefly touched on it. Just talk about Quebec's process.
Sure. I'll speak about exploration permitting because that's where we're at. In May of 2024, Quebec brought in, was the effective date for new legislation about exploration permitting in Quebec. There's a new system called ATI. And what we love about it is it's very clear. It's a list of things you can do without a permit. And then there's a list of things you can do that you need a permit for. So geophysics and hand sampling and light channeling, something like that, no permit. But of course, we want to tell everyone in advance, so it's not a surprise. If you're going to drill or do something else, you require a permit. The application process is very clear. You put out your maps. Here's what we're going to drill. Here's what we're looking for. And it's got a built-in community consultation. And you're required to talk to the community, make a record that you've talked to the community. If they have any concerns that you can't answer, you hand those over to the government. The government, as a middleman, so to speak, will bring everyone together. But that underscores for me that it's a very pro-mining jurisdiction because they want those permits issued and they want to have a record that everyone's been talking before it gets to before a drill starts turning. So we're super happy with that. There's a clear delineation of who's got to do what needs a permit, what doesn't, and we think they've done an excellent job of striking a balance in Quebec.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for jumping into that question from Chad. Everybody, I've got another question from Chad, actually. It's the most liked question, so I'd be remiss not to ask it. It comes up a lot, and I'm just curious everybody's perspective. Raziel from the chat asked, how does the event, they use the word debacle, but I'll use the word event, at Victoria Gold impact permitting and interactions with local communities? What lessons can be learned? Obviously, a big event in the news. Just curious everyone's perspective on what it taught them about their projects. I can throw it to Jeff first, actually.
Yeah, well, certainly it's a scar on the mining industry, and especially in Yukon, to have something like that fail. I don't know what the details are, and who's to blame, if anyone. So it's unfortunate, certainly for everyone, that has happened. How does it affect us? Well, I think we've got to be, sharpen our pencils and make sure that we, do everything that's necessary to, to make sure the environment is protected along the way, whether you're doing a drilling program or you're putting in a tailings dam or whatever. So, I think it's really important, and it drives home the fact that you get the right people to do the right job, as Jamie says, hire the experts, pay the money. I think it was Peter Monk's, I don't know if any of you read it, but his biography, it was basically touting the same thing. Get the best guy you can as your consultant, and you won't regret it. So I think that's the bottom line.
That makes sense. Not the place to cheap out. Jamie, I'll throw it to you for what we've learned from Victoria and how you think it's impacted the industry.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I do know the group over there. They're a good bunch of very smart people. Again, as Jeff said, it's a scar on the industry. I'm just grateful that we're not in Yukon and we're not heap leaching. So those are two good things for my company. But needless to say, is I think if you're to go back again, I don't know the ins and out too much about it, but I think management needs to be more transparent what had happened and continue to communicate to the public, whether it's the First Nations, the Yukon government, or even to the stock market itself, on what was actually happening, because I think they went quiet for a little too long. That's just what I've heard. But needless to say, is there could be a defense for them for not going public on certain things. But needless to say, is it was probably something, or definitely something that shouldn't have happened. And it's unfortunate it happened. And hopefully we can learn by the mistakes from that and some of the tailings disasters as well, that we can all learn that this should never happen again.
Appreciate that. I'll throw it to Brian.
Yeah, it is a very sad event, and I'm sorry that it's happened. And I hope that the communities involved will manage to deal with the ramifications, if there are any, in the long run. Like Jamie, I'll say that that situation is heap leaching for gold, and I think they're using cyanide or an arsenic base or something like that. Again, this panel is about copper, and those materials won't be used to pull anything out, for at least for us, if not for everybody. And for me, how does it affect me? I guess it's another example of the bad news stories are heard louder. They get delivered farther across the media than the good news stories. And that's just something we have to deal with. It's a problem for everyone. Because when we have a conversation next with the community, and they'll say, well, what about what happened there? We won't get the benefit of the doubt. And I guess the industry has to earn the benefit of the doubt. And we'll have to rely on the facts to say, yes, we don't have that. We don't have that chemistry. We won't have that issue. But that's enough.
No, appreciate that. Terry Ann, I'll throw it to you to close this one off.
No, for sure. Very unfortunate event. And really, it was a really good group that got hit. But when you look at industries across the world, whether it be, the medical industry, the pharmaceutical industry, they all get a black eye every now and again. And from that, we learn, we take lessons from that, and we implement best practices. And those are the ones that should be highlighted, because the mining industry has significantly evolved over the years. Technology has, helped us achieve, more, better, faster, safer. And so I think as a mining community, we really need to just kind of bring the best practices and the modernization of mining to the forefront, and really educate people about the really good things that happen in mining. And again, not to be redundant, but the group Better in Our Backyard really does highlight some of those best practices, some of the most amazing reclamations that you've seen. It's really quite beautiful, as once the mining work is done, they bring back that land. The land looks better than when they started, and more useful for the communities. So highlighting those, I think, is really important under these circumstances.
Appreciate it. I'll go back to you, Terry, for the next one. This is also from the chat. I'll invite everybody to give their perspective from a Canadian perspective afterward. But the question in the chat is really specific to the U.S. critical minerals designation. Obviously, has large impact on projects, impact on funding, et cetera. So the question from the chat from Adam is the U.S. in process of naming copper a critical material? And how is this affecting new copper mines or reopening of past producing mines? And there's a follow-up question about if you think the upcoming election or any potential changes in power in the House or Senate will affect copper prices after the upcoming election. So a bunch to throw at you, but take it away, Terry Ann.
Thank you. And short answer is yes. The U.S. has added copper to their critical metals list. Again, I sound like a broken record, but we have the luxury of being beside South 32, and South 32 did in fact receive the Fast 41 from the federal government, so they can fast track that permit, because they're sitting on a ton of critical metals that the U.S. is going to need, and security of supply is really important right now for all Western countries. You see the EU has mandated that 30% of all critical metals be self-sourced. You're seeing the US really, deliver on the Fast 41 on their permits. We're in copper country, Arizona. Arizona is the state that produces the largest amount of copper. So we're in good shape there. But yes, copper is a critical metal for the US, and we're happy to be in the state that produces the most of it.
Awesome. And I'll throw out any of the Canadians want to comment on critical minerals designation in Canada and how it's impacted the industry or getting projects funded or government support. Anybody who wants to jump in, feel free.
Yeah, maybe I'll start, Romeo. The critical metal designation for copper is theoretically can help us raise flow-through money. But on the one hand, the investor gets a little bonus. I think it's a taxable deduction on the critical metals side of things. The problem is that on the other hand, the government has then increased the capital gains cutoff and also minimum tax issues. So they're trying to promote it on one hand, but they seem to be hammering the high net investor on the other hand. So I don't know how, at the end of the day, whether one will balance the other or not. But having that critical metals designation theoretically should help us with raising a flow through with high net individuals.
Appreciate that. Jamie, Brian, if either of you have any other thoughts on this, feel free to jump in.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Cool. Oh, okay. We have dealt numerous times with the federal government on funding. They have earmarked a lot of money for critical metals projects. Unfortunately for us, copper is a co-product with some of the PGMs that we have. So some of those mandates aren't acceptable or accessible to us. But needless to say is they have earmarked some money. I think some people will be able to access that funding. It's not going to be free money. It's not going to be grants. But, they have been quite supportive of the downstream manufacturings, the OEMs. I think sooner or later they're going to have to kind of figure a way out how they're going to supply, get the minerals out of the ground faster and help these mining companies get financed. Because if you have all these battery manufacturers or new car plants without getting the metal from here, if we're still getting from China, it seems to defeat the purpose. So I think there's going to be a change, hopefully soon, maybe in Ontario and certainly in Ottawa, that they need to support mining companies, not just on flow through, by helping out on some other funding. As the original conversation we had about the interest in copper companies or base metals companies, there's very few funding sources available in Canada right now. A lot of the funds have jumped ship. They become generalists or fundamentalists or whatever you want to call it. So it would be nice if, as I think Lassonde said, or one of the other fellows we're talking about, is to get some of the pension plans to help finance or invest in some of these junior, mid-cap, or even other developing stories that are out there, which would have a huge effect on the mining industry and especially the base metals, because we do need that help. So hopefully there could be some sort of changes made to allowing other people, as in Quebec, I think 3% or sorry, not Quebec, Australia, I think 3% of the pension plans or something like that have to invest in mining stocks. My numbers could be a little bit off. We don't have that in Canada. If we had that, all of our stocks would be going double, triples, whatever it might be. And that would be nice to have some policy changes.
Appreciate that. Brian, if you got any last thoughts.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of waterfront that's been covered on this comment, so I'll keep it brief. Copper is a critical mineral in Canada. Quebec has more of that funding infrastructure in it than Ontario does. I think Ontario, to the benefit of Jeff and Jamie, will eventually figure that out and start to copy what Quebec is doing. They've got funding for juniors that are exploring. They've got extra funding for juniors exploring in northern Quebec. They've got I'll call it a supply chain of funding and financing for projects that they think are going to be big winners, Investment Quebec and things like that. But at the federal level, and I've had conversations with Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson about this, they say all the right things, but they still make it really hard to push forward. And Jeff's right. There's flow through that helps. By the way, we're just about to close a flow through offering. So if somebody's interested in flow through, give me a call. The point about what's happening in Ottawa is they want the metals, but they don't want the mines yet. And eventually those two things are going to collide with each other, whether it's next year, next election, the election after. Eventually it'll be seen as a good thing to have the jobs here, all the mining jobs, especially when productivity remains low here. And if the US is going to have the mining jobs, why shouldn't we? I believe it will all be fixed. We're at the start we're probably in the second inning of a great run for production and mine building in Canada.
Appreciate that. 10 minutes left in the hour. I got one question for each of you. Please, use this opportunity to talk about security more broadly. I'll start with Jeff. I know several projects in Cascade's portfolio. How do you prioritize your exploration efforts with, as always, limited funding across different sites? And then additionally, what are key milestones you're aiming to achieve in the near term?
Thanks, Rolo. Yeah, I'll go through this relatively quickly so that everybody else has a chance. But Cascade has 5 projects in its portfolio, and they're basically like a pipeline of projects. So some are ready to drill, like at Rogers Creek, and other ones are sort of more greenfields, like at Fire Mountain and Bendor. So what we're doing is we're prioritizing, at this point anyway, those projects that we think will give us and our shareholders the best bang for the buck. So these days, I mean, if you've got geochem results or geophysics results or something like that, it really doesn't do much in the market. So our focus really is to get in and do some drilling at Rogers Creek. We've got the benefit of having years of data that has been collected by ourselves and by previous operators. Technology that we're using is just basically 3D inversions of a lot of the information, the magnetics and the IP. We're using hyperspectral, all of that kind of thing. So that's all kind of come into a basket. We've done the interpretation, and basically we're ready to put that drill on at Rogers Creek. And then, once that's happened, we'll work on a few of the other ones. For instance, the VMS project in Ontario, not far from Marathon. It's up near Dryden and Sioux Lookout area. So we've got a project there that's drill ready to go. We'll pop a drill in there. Then the other ones will take a bit of time to get to that stage, that we're confident in those targets. So priority is based on what's drill ready right now and where can we get the best, interaction with our shareholders, and hopefully the price of the stock can rise. And maybe just a quick plug that, like Brian, we do have an offering out at the moment, some flow through and non-flow through. If anybody's interested in talking about it, please get in contact. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Brian, talk about the Blue Lake project. I know there's significant historical data and an identified high-grade copper ore. How are you leveraging that historical information, and what are your expectations for expanding that resource?
Sure. Well, you can't see it in the background, but I'm packing tonight. 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, I'm on my way up to the remote site. We're starting off another 6 weeks of exploration. We'll have a crew of 12 there. And to put that in perspective, so the high grade, what have we got? We've got in the historical record, so companies before us, decades before, they drove an adit into the side at the surface. There are, in round numbers, I'll give it 5 million tons of 1% copper with 0.5% nickel, and then some PGM credits in the back end. And that is in a couple of tiny spots inside of our huge package. We've got, if I have the number right, we've got about 500 square kilometers to explore. That's all ours, because just 2 months ago, we tripled our claims package. And we did that because we went out to the site in May, and I'll tell you who we is. 2 consulting geos, myself and Doug McQuarrie. Most people on the call will know Doug from his founding of Asante Gold, just 3 operating gold mines in Ghana. Well, Doug's out of Asante as an officer and director, and he's now with us, and he's leading our decisions. So Doug and I figured out that the provincial government of Quebec and Newfoundland and the federal government had collaborated on a 30,000 lake bed and soil sample survey. And then they mapped all of those results in isobars. So we staked up, after we found this report, we staked up everything that was available that was greater than 200 parts per million copper, so 0.2 copper. And now we're going to go explore that. So we've got an immense area. It's anchored and centered by this 5 million tons historical. The 5 million tons, like I said, is at surface, and it's in pods clustered around. So what we think we're going to find, or correction, what we're hoping to find, is essentially the next Raglan, which is pods in northern Quebec, inside the Labrador Trough, which is where the Superior Craton, for the geos in the room, and the rest of the East Coast kind of squeezed together. We're in that same trend, we're in that same trough. We just have consolidated everything in the southern end that we think is worth having. So we're starting with a high grade already. We're looking to get multiples of that. And if it happens that we bump into a huge low grade, well, you've already heard from me that it's open pit country for iron mining anyway. So we've got 2 or 3 different ways to win there.
Appreciate that. Terry Ann, I'll throw it to you. I know that, just from my understanding, team just brought on a new VPX. Curious if you could tell us about him. Is he looking at the project with a new lens?
Yes, really excited to have Alan join the team. And I think the first thing he did was he gathered everybody into one room. He has access to some of the, the most elite guys in the business, the likes of Peter McGaw and Quentin Hennig, and including me. And on the communication side, he put everybody in a room and asked for everybody's feedback on not only the project itself, but also, investor sentiment. What do they expect to see in this next drill program? And he compiled all of the data from the great minds that have studied this deposit in the past. I know Peter's very, very familiar. Peter McGaw is very, very familiar with Sunnyside. And so it was really nice to see such a collaborative effort, and his leadership really kind of bring everybody together. He met with the analysts. He's met with some of our largest shareholders, and he's put together quite a robust drill program, and he intends to drill in September. So very excited for that moving forward, and hence why I upped my ante and wrote another check into the financing this past month. So excited for him to deploy that capital.
Awesome. Wrapping it up with Jamie, curious if you could provide an update on Marathon's progress since the latest feasibility study, and what are the next steps? How do you see the project impacting copper in North America?
Just Terry, are you doing flow through like Jeff and Brian on your?
We're in Arizona.
I know it was only a joke, Terry.
Jamie, I missed a point in my retelling of it that you've opened the door. Doug McQuarrie bought half of our 2 million equity raise. So there's insider putting in money, and between Doug and I, we own half the company. So the money's well spent.
Okay. Well, congrats. Sorry. Just going back to whatever your question was, Romeo, I answer it. But, I hope for all their success in the drill bit. We all need it in this mining industry. We're all together on this. We do need some copper discoveries. We need some interest in the market. Been very far and few between discoveries from Filo. There's probably a few others that are escaping my mind right now, but I hope you all the best on it. We did some exploration. We got some success as well, but needless to say is our focus is on developing the project. And I think we need exploration, we need development, we need producers. We need the producers to make money. We need the developers to be successful, to not use too much cost overruns, to actually build it on time, on budget, which isn't happening very often. G Mining, very successful down in Brazil and TZ. Greenstone was quite successful. So we're hopeful going to be the next critical metal project in Canada getting built. I know Forehand's there with us is now. They just got fully financed. So looking for a lot of good things with Generation Mining. We got 3 provincial permits left to get approved. Again, I'm repeating myself here, but we anticipate to get them soon. And I know we're running out of time here, but just as I said earlier about me being patient on the permits, so the investors just can be patient on the market. I think there's going to be some generous inflows of funding into this market, and I think we're all going to be very well rewarded in the future. If Brian said we're in the second inning, I think we're, maybe even earlier stage than that. There's going to be a lot of money coming to this market, and I have a lot of hope in this in this market, and I'm a true believer in generation. And if we're going to start name dropping names and who put in a bunch of money, I own. You guys can take a look on the filings. Just don't tell my wife. I own way too many generation mining that I can't sell, and I'm a firm believer of it, and I'll continue to buy more when the opportunity arises. So, thank you, Six. Thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. It's the road from Baby Duck to Dom Perignon. So thank you all.
Hey, look, it's right here. I wasn't lying.
He was dead serious.
Don't drink it
We'll
all.
all come back when I start building this. We'll all come back and drink this. It does
Perfect.
say chilled. Served chilled, so I got to put it in the fridge.
I could use a couple minutes of fridge, but thanks everybody so much for your time. I appreciate the conversation. Everybody in the audience, I know I didn't get to all your questions, but I'll make sure you hear from us pretty soon. You'll get the replay in short order. Thank you all very much, everybody. Have a great day.